Best story for listening. Listen and repeat after me. My name is Jana. What I'm about to tell you is not just my story, but the story of a whole journey. A journey through love, mistakes, and perhaps hope. A story where dreams intertwine with reality, where desires clash with pain, but where every moment of doubt carries with it the promise of a hidden light. Jana, a young woman full of dreams and promises, lived in a small town where time seemed to move slowly, as if frozen. She had grown up with the idea that anything was possible, that love was merely a matter of timing, of chance. That morning, she had no idea that everything would change. She met him under a grey sky, his gaze lost in the distance, as if he too was waiting for something. His name was Alexandra, and his deep blue eyes carried the weight of unspoken secrets. Little did she know that he would be the reason for her smiles and her tears. That day, they exchanged a few shy words, but an invisible connection had already formed between them. It was the beginning of a love story that would shatter all the certainties she thought she had about life. Alexandra and Jana's love grew slowly, like a dream woven day by day. They would meet each afternoon, wandering through the cobbled streets of the town, sharing their deepest thoughts, hopes, and fears. The evenings were spent in cafes where their hands brushed, trembling, before they held each other with an almost unreal gentleness. But as time passed, Jana began to feel uneasy, a subtle crack in their perfect happiness. Alexandra became distant, his smiles grew rarer, and his silences heavier. She knew he was hiding something, but she didn't want to see it. She still believed in love, and nothing should ruin the beauty of what they had, right? Alexandra's silence became increasingly heavy. Jana felt a growing discomfort, one that grew with each passing day. He became distant, his calls became less frequent, and his gaze often avoided hers. She felt as though she had become a stranger in her own relationship. Deep down, she knew there was something he wasn't telling her, something he was hiding, but she refused to believe the unimaginable. One afternoon, as she walked past his apartment, a strange idea began to take root in her mind. She could no longer bear the uncertainty, the feeling of living in the shadow of his life. She needed answers. And this time, she decided to seek the truth, no matter the cost. Without thinking about the extent of what she was about to discover, she stopped in front of Alexandra's building, her heart pounding. The entrance was empty, silent, as if time had frozen. She slowly climbed the stairs, her stomach in knots, until she reached the door of his apartment. Everything was calm, no sound. Then she heard voices. She froze, listening quietly. Alexandra's voice, then another voice, feminine, soft, but above all familiar. A voice she had heard in the dreams she had shared with him. A voice that didn't belong to her. Her heart raced. He was there with her. That woman, the one he had never mentioned. The door was ajar, and instinctively Jana approached, her gaze drowned in the shadows. Then she saw it, Alexandra, sitting on the couch, holding a small boy in his arms, a baby no more than 3 years old. He looked happy, at peace, far from the image she had of him. Next to him, the woman who smiled at him tenderly, a woman she didn't know. A woman who seemed to belong there, like an integral part of his life. The shock paralyzed her. Every fiber of her being screamed. Why hadn't he told me? How could she have been so blind? Why had he lied to her? Why had he given her a love that, in the end, didn't belong to her? The minutes that followed seemed to last an eternity. Jana stood there, frozen in the shadows, watching a scene of happiness she could never have imagined. There was so much love in Alexandra's gestures towards this woman, and the little boy who seemed to be the most precious thing in his life. But then, in silence, the truth struck. Alexandra had a family. He was married, and this little boy was his son. The world around her seemed to collapse beneath her feet. What she had thought was a unique, sincere love story was nothing but a brief chapter in the life of a man who had betrayed her without her knowing. The image she had of their relationship, that ideal and perfect image, shattered into 1,000 pieces. She turned away quickly, her heart broken. But before she could leave, she heard one last sentence, spoken by the woman she had seen. "You know, I'm glad you finally reconnected with us." Her voice trembled slightly, as if this reconciliation was a form of relief after a long, difficult journey. These words echoed in her mind like a sledgehammer. She then realized that Alexandra's story wasn't just the tale of a lost man, but also the story of a woman who, too, had been unaware of what he was living outside their home. She rushed out of the building, tears burning in her eyes. She felt betrayed, invisible, like a shadow that had never existed for him. Jana felt betrayed, helpless, but also angry. She decided to confront Alexandra. It wasn't easy, but the day they met, everything became clear. Alexandra explained to her, his gaze lost in the distance, that it hadn't been a choice he made out of malice. He had been married for several years to another woman, but their marriage had become an obligation, a routine, almost a cage. Their relationship had ended long before he met Jana, but he hadn't had the courage to leave. He had hoped that a new story, a true love, could repair what was broken. Yet he was also afraid of destroying what remained of his home, afraid of breaking his son. It was this weight, this guilt that had pushed him away. He had believed that the best solution was to disappear, to leave before things became too complicated. But he couldn't erase what he had felt for her. Time passed, and Jana rose again. She had not forgotten, of course. Alexandra's love was etched in her, but she now knew that life continued beyond the suffering. One day, as she was walking through the park where they had met, she crossed his gaze. He had not changed. Neither of them had really changed, but this time it was different. There was no more resentment, just a mutual acceptance of what had been and what would never be. She smiled at him, this time without expectation. And in that smile, there was something new, hope. Because after all the mistakes and pain, she now knew that every story, even a broken one, could lead to a new light. A light she had finally learned to see in herself.